Okay, so this presentation is about weight management. It's just kind of an overview of what you should be looking at when it comes to trying to maintain weight, to lose weight, gain weight. And I'll outline a lot of different things that are some mysteries in terms of weight loss and weight gain, and some basic stuff, some nutrition things I'll discuss. But primarily what we're looking at here is trying to find an ideal weight for you. Now that weight can vary greatly based on your body type, your genetics, how much muscle mass you have. There's many factors that actually go into what weight you should be. But a lot of people actually mistake a BMI chart for showing a height to weight relationship, showing if you're this height, here's where you should be in terms of weight. Now all a BMI chart actually shows is your risk of 3 factors. So that's heart disease, hypertension, and diabetes. So basically, the more you're in the mid-range, the lower your risk are for those things. So it's not really telling you you're this height, you should be this weight. It's just kind of a generalization based on those things for risk factors. So a pro athlete is going to have more muscle mass, and they would actually look obese on a BMI chart. So someone that is maybe leaner, maybe someone that does a lot of running and things like that, might actually look underweight because they're really lean and they don't have as much muscle mass. So it's really dependent, but really what this presentation is more about is ways to manage your weight. Again, if you want to maintain it, if you want to increase muscle mass, your weight, if you want to decrease your weight, there's a bunch of different things I'm going to talk about in regards to that. So first of all, let's talk about what your actual weight is. So it's really just gravity. So it's actually the sum of these 6 parts. Now these 6 parts are fluctuating somewhat, some more than others, and I'll discuss how they actually come together. But for the most part, most people rate how they're doing in terms of the number on the scale. And the numbers can lie because you can be dehydrated, you can be bloated, there's all different types of factors, the time of day, if you've gone to the bathroom, there's a lot of different factors that can affect that number on the scale. But the main factor I want to discuss is that your weight is the sum of these 6 parts, and I'll break them down as we go along. So number 1, the first part is muscles. Right? So skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, those muscles basically make up a decent percentage of your body weight, your total weight. Now, I put a little plus sign after that because that can increase and it can decrease. Okay, so that one can change up and down. If you're exercising more, you're typically going to build up a little bit more muscle mass, so that will show on the scales an increase in weight. Now, does that necessarily mean that's a bad thing if you're looking at your weight as your measurement of progress? Yes, because you think that you're going in the wrong direction. But typically what happens when people start exercising is you increase muscle mass before you actually start losing weight. So you boost your metabolism with that extra muscle mass, but you're going to see it on the scale first. So that's the one thing to look at when it comes to muscle mass. Number 2 are bones. So bones typically will increase a little bit, that's why I put a plus sign after it, but obviously bones have density, right? So they add to your weight. So bone mass can actually increase or decrease over time, especially if you're doing more resistance training, you're actually going to increase bone density. So that's going to increase your weight a little bit as well. Not a ton, you'll see it more in muscle mass, but you will see it in addition in your bones. Your organs. Okay, so if we're looking at your heart, lungs, all those good things in your digestive tract, your brain, all those organs do take up weight, right? So some of them, especially your intestines and the amount of food that's in them, which we'll get to later, intestinal bulk, that's excess weight, okay? But that's not really going to change that much, so that one kind of stays the same. When it comes to fluids, this is one that's going to go up and down pretty consistently, especially based on dehydration. Most people are very dehydrated, so this is a number that's going to go up and down a bit. If you're retaining fluid, that's going to increase that number. If you're dehydrated, that's going to drop that down a bit. So the fluids in your body, the amount of volume of blood you have is typically not going to change that much. But in terms of how much you're drinking and or eating, that can definitely affect the amount of fluids in your body. So the average person, if you're dehydrated, you could be 3 pounds less one day and 3 pounds more the next, based on how much salt you take in and how much you're retaining. There's a lot of things that affect the amount of fluids in your body. Body fat is the main one we look to try to reduce. Okay, so reduction of body fat comes from basically your body burning off those stored away calories. And we'll talk about where those calories come from and how to kind of address them or use them. But primarily that's the one we look at trying to reduce. So we want to drop your body fat. So what it does is actually change your body's composition. How much lean body mass there is to body fat weight. Okay, so those are two things. If you ever do like a body composition test, caliper test, any like bioimpedance with a body fat scale and things like that, that's what that's looking to do, is to try to split up what is body fat and what's everything else. Now the sixth one, which is called intestinal bulk, is very important. So this is the one where if you ate a really big meal, let's say it's a heavy pasta meal, something that really bloats you and slows down digestion. If you were to get on the scale after eating a meal like that, you could be 3 to 5 pounds different. Even though you didn't eat that much, you're probably retaining more fluid, things have slowed down, maybe your previous meals have slowed down as well in digestion, so you're retaining a lot more of that intestinal bulk. So that's actually food that's undigested, that's in your digestive tract, that hasn't passed through yet. So that is a big factor when it comes to weighing yourself. If you haven't gone to the bathroom or you're retaining a lot of weight from a large meal, that's going to show up on the scale because you're physically holding on to that. Not saying that you're actually not going to pass that through and that weight's not going to change, but if you were to weigh yourself after that, you would see that on the scale. So the key to this slide is that your total weight is the sum of these 6 parts. Now again, some of these parts will increase, some will decrease. The main one we want to focus on decreasing is your body fat. Okay, so your body fat weight is the number one thing of these 6 that we want to drop. The others are going to fluctuate a bit. Some we want to increase. The more muscle mass you have, the higher your metabolism, and the more calories you burn 24/7, especially as you sleep as well. So those are the things we're going to look at with this presentation. Okay, the next slide is fat loss versus weight loss. So if we looked at those previous 6 points and you jumped on the scale, you hadn't had a big meal and you were down 3 pounds, you had a big meal and the next day you weighed yourself and you're up 3 pounds. So this kind of yo-yo roller coaster up and down is very frustrating for most people when they're trying to lose weight. And there's many factors that kind of go into that, again with those 6 points. But the main thing we want to look at is not just weight loss on the scale, but true fat loss. How you're looking, how your clothes are fitting, how you're feeling. Those things are the keys to this program in managing your weight. So fat loss is different than weight loss. So when we look at fat loss, that's a composition change. That's changing how much muscle mass and fat-free mass you have versus body fat weight. Okay, so we want to look at that. So you can increase one and that will decrease the other. So you increase muscle mass, it boosts your metabolism. That's going to start taking and using a lot of that stored energy in the terms of stored body fat. So that's the main thing to look at when it comes to the scale. Is not really going to tell you the full picture. And there's other ways you can measure body fat and progress, and we'll talk about some of those. But if you look at, let's say, a lot of people nowadays have body fat scale. So it's a little scale, or typical scale, with these small little, usually metal sensor plates on them. Okay, so what that's trying to do is what's called bioimpedance. So it's actually passing a signal through your body and trying to measure how fast it comes back to the other side, and it's trying to estimate how much of your body is fat-free mass and then body fat weight. All right, those are not very accurate at all. Scales as well can vary quite a bit, especially if you have your shoes and clothing on. That'll throw it off as well. If you don't have the same consistent testing, like if you're wearing different clothes or shoes or have a jacket, there's many things you have to look at when you're weighing yourself. But it is good to see over time how things are changing. And weight loss is not really a direct line saying, okay, I'm right here and I want to get to here. There's not really that direct line. So it's kind of ups and downs, but at least it's heading that direction. So a lot of people get very frustrated if they don't see that steady decrease in their weight if they're looking to lose body fat and just weight loss. So the main thing is make sure you're looking at other factors, how your clothes are fitting. People will tell you look like you lost weight. There's a lot of things that we see every day, like we see ourselves in the mirror. We don't see that much of a change. Pictures will definitely show that over time. Whereas if you just kind of look at yourself every day, you're not seeing those changes. but these changes take time to develop. So that's the main thing we want to look at is you have fat loss and you have weight loss. You can lose weight by not eating much and just kind of starving yourself, but that's not a healthy way. So we want to look at the healthiest ways to really lose body fat, not just weight, and to really track that progress in a proper way so you're not just looking at the one number, but again, those 6 factors are the things you want to address. So let's talk about what is body fat. So body fat is basically excess energy. So if you have a surplus of energy in terms of calories in your body's very efficient at holding on to that. So our fat cells are more kind of like a feast or famine. So if you're feasting, you have this surplus of energy, your body's going to hold on to it in this form of stored body fat. So these are cells that can basically grow as big as needed to store that excess energy. So each pound of body fat is 3,500 calories of energy per pound. Now if you look here in the picture, this is just a representation of 5 pounds of fat versus 5 pounds of muscle. So 5 pounds of fat takes up a lot more space, okay, versus 5 pounds of muscle. So one thing that most people believe is that you can turn fat into muscle. That doesn't happen. These are 2 totally separate types of cells. This is for fat storage. It's almost like a gas tank, and this is like your engine. So this burns fat as energy, okay? And different types of muscles do different things. It gets a little more complex. But in general, this is like an engine that sucks up the fuel from this fuel tank, all right? But you can see how much bigger this is than 5 pounds of muscle. So if you were to lose 5 pounds of fat and gain 5 pounds of muscles, the number on the scale would be the same, but look how much less space it would take up. So you'd see that in your tape measurements, the way your clothes are fitting, so on and so forth. So that's the main thing to look at. The more muscle mass you have, even though your weight might be going up, it's going to start tapping into more and more of your body fat. So again, 3,500 calories per pound of body fat in terms of energy, and then your muscle mass is basically going to help to burn that off, okay? So again, when you have a surplus of energy, when you take in more than you burn, you have a surplus, your body is very good at that whole feasting process of storing it away, and then if there was a famine, you weren't eating, you would start to tap into that. Unfortunately, nowadays, we don't have that many famines. People are always feasting and we're always adding. We're not really taking away from that. So number one, we'll look at when it comes to nutrition, carbohydrates are pretty much just energy. Okay, so that's the primary component which is stored in body fat is sugar, carbs, right? Carbs taste really good. You know, they're addictive, and they also make you gain lots of body fat. So if you're eating foods that are, let's say it says it's low fat or fat free, when they take the fat out, typically they're adding more sugar, okay, or more carbohydrates. We'll talk about fast carbs and slow carbs and glycemic index later. But primarily, carbohydrates are what are stored in body fat, okay? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, same makeup as body fat cells, and we'll talk about protein and fat as well. But many people are very carb sensitive, okay? Especially if you're diabetic or hypoglycemic. But when I say carb sensitive, what I mean is your body is very good at storing those carbs as body fat. So that's a big thing to look at. So carbs or carbs, not excess calories, create fat storage. Okay, so your body is very good at storing that away. Proteins and fats are more a matrix that form more the cell linings and the bodies of the cells themselves. Whereas basically carbohydrates are used inside the cell as energy. So carbs are just energy, protein and fat are more structural components. Okay, and they don't do the same thing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the main factor I want to get across here is when you reduce the size of your body fat, you're reducing your tape measurements, your circumferences, your clothes are fitting better. Your muscle mass is your engine to tap into that stored energy. Okay, so how do we gain it? Positive energy balance. So positive is not good in this respect, meaning that when you have more, you have this surplus, okay, of what you're consuming is heavier than what you're burning. So you have resting calories, you have activity, exercise. If you're not doing more than you're taking in, that excess is going to be stored away. Okay, so that's considered a positive energy balance, meaning that you have more, you're taking in more than you're burning. Okay? So in order to reverse that, the next slide is going to be a negative energy balance, which means you're burning more than you're taking in. So you're tapping into that stored body fat. Really simple stuff. A couple things to look at here is that fat cells have an unlimited potential for storage, meaning a fat cell can just get bigger and bigger and bigger. You've seen, obviously, pictures of morbidly obese people. I mean, they didn't add a number of fat cells, they basically just increased the size of them. Okay? When people do liposuction, when you reduce the number of cells, the other cells just get bigger. So liposuction typically is not very effective. There are some things with contouring and things like that, and moving fat cells around. That's more for look and aesthetics, but in general, you can't take away cells and not expect the others to take the place. There's a bunch of different theories on if you can increase the number of fat cells or if you can decrease them naturally, but in general, it's kind of like it's up in the air in terms of that. So number one is that this positive energy balance is why we gain excess body fat. It's where it's coming from. When we're less active and we eat more, especially in the winter when we're hibernating, typically you're going to add more body fat. You're not as active. The other thing in the winter, which is one benefit, is that our bodies, to maintain our body temperature, we burn more calories just to stay warm. However, a lot of people wear very heavy clothing. They crank up the heat in their office and home. So their bodies aren't really having to adapt to that. If we had to live outside, we'd burn a ton of calories just trying to stay warm and maintain and survive. So that's one thing that's changed over time with modern, our modern living. So again, how do we lose body fat? So we go into a negative energy balance. Negative meaning good. So this way, we're having more in terms of your resting calories, meaning your body burns a certain amount of calories just at rest. The more muscle mass you have, the higher metabolism is. Activity and exercise. So the more active you are, you can tap into what you've stored away because you have that deficit. So what we're looking at here is a deficit of energy, so your body has to tap into what you've stored away and held on to for later. So what you want to do is you want to burn more than you eat. Again, the scale is going to tip the opposite way. Body fat, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen breaks down into water, carbon dioxide. So we actually exhale it out. In the winter, you can see your breath and you see this water vapor. What that actually is your metabolites. So when your body breaks down body fat, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, it actually turns into water and carbon dioxide. So you're actually breathing it out. So a lot of people think, well, maybe you could breathe a lot more, breathe heavy, and you're going to burn more. It doesn't work like that. This is just exhaling, getting rid of these waste products. So you're turning body fat into carbon dioxide and water, and you're expelling it. And like I said, you can see this in the winter. Obviously, it's happening in the summer as well, but in the winter, because you have lack of humidity, you're actually seeing that in the air. So that's the main thing we want to look at when it comes to losing body fat, is you want a negative caloric energy balance. So basically, you're burning more than you're taking in. So it's shifting the scale. Okay? Now, I've talked about this in many of my other presentations. Activity and exercise really are two different things. So activity is just to kind of maintain where you're at, right? So if you're walking, that's activity. If you're doing something that's a light movement, that's going to be activity. Something that's exercise, we're going to be, breathing heavily, having to breathe through your mouth. That's going to help your body change. So that's typically going to help strengthen your body. You're going to build more muscle mass that way. When you wake up in the morning, the whole 10,000 steps approach is based on activity. So since we have very sedentary lives in this country especially, the whole 10,000 steps is saying you have to move this much in order to maintain. So every morning you wake up, you're actually 10,000 steps below zero. So if you hit your 10,000 steps for the day, you're now at zero. You're not 10,000 steps above zero. You're now at zero. So if you go above and beyond that, then that's really increasing your activity rate, but it's not exercise. You're not going to gain significant muscle by walking another 2,000 steps. It doesn't really work that way. So the one thing we want to look at is one of the negative consequences or side effects of that is that people think that once they hit 10,000 steps, they can reward themselves. So if you were to hit your 10,000 steps and then you said, well, I can relax or I can have ice cream or some junk food, that then brings you down below zero. So you're in a negative. So you just brought yourself down, and you would need probably another 10,000 steps to recoup that. So that's one of the negative side effects, the whole 10,000 steps, that people think that it's a benchmark, and once you get to that point, you should be able to reward yourself, but really you're just getting to zero. If you did nothing and just sat around all day, you'd always be negative, and that would increase the amount of body fat your body retains because you're not tapping into it. So again, this relates more to calories and energy production and deficits, but the main thing to look at is you need to stay active to maintain your health, but you also need to exercise in order to change it. As we age, one of the biggest components is activity and exercise in reducing the aging process. Okay, you probably know a lot of people that age more than their chronologic age. So their physiologic age, meaning what their body looks like, is advanced in terms of how old they actually are chronologically. So that's a common thing you'll see, especially if you see your friends on high school friends and how they've aged versus maybe you hopefully haven't as much. But those are things to look at when it comes to your physiologic age versus chronologic age, and how to kind of balance those things off, and what you can do yourself to maintain that. So look here, exercise in order to change your body. I've done a bunch of videos on exercise. So if you did 4 30-minute workouts per week, which is only 2 hours total, that drastically improves your anti-aging and just keeping yourself active and avoiding illness. Okay, so progress tracking. Again, we talked about the scale. I always tell people only weigh yourself once a week and use the same exact clothing, the same time of day. Just set it once a week. If you measure yourself on the scale more than once per week, it's going to be up and down, and it's going to be very frustrating. So once a week, the same time, let's say it's Monday morning, same time, you write it on a calendar, you put it in your app, whatever you want to do. Do not measure yourself on the scale more than once a week, because your weight is constantly fluctuating. Throughout the day, if you measure yourself in the morning, afternoon, evening, you'd have 3 different numbers. It's never going to be the same. But we want to see those changes over time, but it's not going to be a direct line. So only once per week you really should be using the scale to test your progress. Now, I do like using tape measurements to track progress. Again, this is something at most once per week, probably every other week to do this. But basically, using just a basic tape measure, you want to measure to the 1/4 inch. You don't want to go real super specific, but to the 1/4 inch is usually enough. And the main 4 sites I look at to measure would be chest, waist, hips, and thigh. Those are the main areas that are going to be changing. And if you're measuring yourself, those are pretty simple areas to do. If you have someone else, a partner or husband or wife, they can do this for you if you're okay with that. That's another thing, but these are typically sites you can measure yourself. The other thing that I really like to do with people to set goals, but also to track progress, is to have a certain pants, shirt, dress, whatever you have that you want to fit back into. To try that on to measure your progress. So this way, if something is a bit snug or you can't fit into it, these are our targets to shoot for. Instead of a certain weight, I want to be this weight. It's much better to try and fit back into a pair of clothing you have. Jeans, dress, shirts, things like that. Those are keys to kind of show how things are changing over time. Versus just a number on the scale, your clothes might not be fitting different. Sometimes your weight goes up, but your clothes fit better. Okay, so especially that would be the case if you're increasing muscle and losing fat, because again, it takes up less space. So clothing size are very good. They're very motivating to try and get back into a certain, article of clothing that you have. Most people don't get rid of clothing they really like. It just sits in their closet, and they buy new clothes because they don't fit in their old clothes. So the key to a lot of this should be fitting back in the clothes you like. Some people get rid of those clothes and then they have to buy a whole new wardrobe, but if you already have it, it just doesn't fit, that's a good motivator to get back into that clothing that you enjoy and like. Pictures, like I said, are very powerful. Now obviously these would be pictures you want to keep to yourself. You don't really want to share them with people. Obviously a lot of these fitness programs show people holding newspapers and then bikinis and things like that. Just basic, wear the same clothing take one picture from the front, one from the side, one from the back. That you should see the changes there, especially in your waist, your arms and chest. Those are great things to do, and use that effectively to show that progress. So look here, we're looking at calories and fat loss. Okay, so calories are not created equal. If we look at the 4 macronutrients, you have proteins, carbs, and fats, and I also include water because we need that in larger quantities. So basically, protein and carbs are 4 calories, which is energy per gram. Fats are going to be 9. So most people thought, this is a probably several decade old theory, that if you cut out fat, that you would actually lose weight because it's more higher in calories. But we don't use fat and protein the same way in our body. They're not just energy. They are structural components, whereas carbs are just straight out energy. Okay, so that's what's going to be stored as excess body fat. Whereas protein and carbs are going to make a matrix for each cell, and then, like I said, carbohydrates are going to be burned inside that cell for energy. What I like to tell people to do is to try not to be perfect. Don't eat perfect all the time. It's going to throw you off course. 80-20 is a great approach. 80% of the time, eat clean, whole foods, homemade stuff that you have control over what's in the food. 20%, eat dirty. Eat stuff that you want. If someone brings, has a birthday, has cake at the office, have it. Anytime you totally restrict yourself from having something, it totally changes your mindset, and then you fall off. I mean, that's why most people fall off diets, because they try to be super perfect and not cheat. 20% is cheating, and it's not going to negatively affect you. It's actually going to keep you more on track. So research shows that if you cheat a little bit, it actually helps you get to your goal faster than if you try to be super strict and don't do that at all. You deprive yourself, and it just increases your cravings for those things that you're not taking in. Okay, so again, I talked about carbohydrates a bit. The main classification we look at with carbohydrates is a high glycemic index. So you have high glycemic index carbohydrates, you have low and moderate. I also break it down into fast and slow carbs. Okay, so any fast carb is going to be glycemic index of 50 or higher. Anything that's going to be a slow carb is 50 or less. Right? So basically bread, pasta, rice, cereal, cookies, crackers, chips, pretzels, juice, soft drinks, that's all fast sugar. Okay, so that's going to hit your bloodstream fast. Your body's going to have to process that and store it as body fat. So even though that stuff doesn't contain fat, it's stored as fat. Okay? So slow carbs are things that take longer to break down your system. Fruits and vegetables. The vegetables I tell you that don't apply to this are going to be a higher glycemic index. Would be like potatoes. For vegetables, for fruits like a banana is pretty much a high glycemic index. It's high sugar content. So that's going to be a fast carb. But primarily most fruits and vegetables are going to be slow carbs. Body fat versus dietary fat. Most people mix that up. You have adipose tissue, which is what body fat is, and then you have lipids or dietary fats. They're 2 totally different things. Again, you're going to use these fats more for structural components, more for hormones, things like that. You're not going to be storing them as body fat. Okay, that's been disproven time and time again that the more fat you eat, the fatter you're going to be. That does not happen. Does not get stored that way. So proteins and fats, again, form the structural components of cell walls. The connection between sleep loss and fat loss are direct in that the main thing is if you're not sleeping, you're going to want stimulants to keep you awake. Okay, so those stimulants are typically caffeine, sugar, carbs, things that are going to increase your energy levels artificially. So what happens is when you don't sleep, you're going to eat more processed carbohydrates. Okay, your motivation is typically depleted because as you have more and more carbs, it kind of overloads your system. You have decision fatigue, and typically what that happens there is that you're going to just take the easiest route. Okay, so you don't want to think about it. You don't want to have to worry about counting macros and things, which you really shouldn't have to. But when you're stressed, when you're not sleeping, that's going to directly affect the amount of carbohydrates you take in, and that's going to affect the number on the scale and how you feel. So again, caffeine, sugar, energy drinks, nicotine, all these things basically are stimulants. They'll wake you up. The main thing is that fast carbs also are going to affect your blood sugar and make you increase and hold on to more stored body fat. It's about weight management, and just, again, contact me if you have any questions. Everything's pretty direct. Everyone's a bit different. There's tons of diets out there. This is just an overview of what to look at. And I wait to evaluate diets and programs and just what you're doing on a daily basis. So, hope you enjoyed this and got some information out of it, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.